Today we're watching the British Crusade Against Slavery. You know what's up. Slavery, really bad. I'm not a fan. But yeah, let's watch.
Britain's criminally stupid attitudes to race and immigration are beyond parody, by Frankie Boyle. For those who aren't aware, Frankie Boyle is a famous Scottish comedian who is most renowned for being pretty damn offensive. Needless to say, I'm a fan of his. And so when Frankie Boyle writes an article for The Guardian of all places, with the subtitle, "The anti-immigration election rhetoric is perverse. We fear the arrival of people we have drawn here with the wealth we stole from them," I can see the misinformation coming a mile away. So Frankie begins the article by waffling in an overly verbose manner, reminiscent of Charlie Brooker, another man who I'm a fan of, but has been led astray by misinformation.
This guy is a
fan.
It's
one of these sort of contradictions.
He doesn't want to
say
something bad
when he was
about
writing them, but when you actually think about it, are rather silly. I mean, here he is pointing out the irony of the leaders being nationalist and warning about the Scottish National Party, after making a crack about how the Scottish discovered penicillin and taking credit for this for some reason.
What is that?
And for some reason he seems to mix up the concepts of trade and immigration. But these really aren't very important. I'm not even bothered that he just assumes that an Australian-style point system for immigration will obviously be a racist system that caters exclusively to white people. You know, this is despite the fact that Cambridge...
Racism kinda, it makes me chuckle a little bit, bro. Like, I don't know, when I think about it, it's like, it's really for poor people. That's what, like, when people are hating, like, oh, I hate that guy's black, I don't like him, I don't like this guy, he's black. Oh, I don't like that guy, wrong color, he's Asian, this and this. When I see stuff like that, I laugh a lot because it just separates you for no reason. But then there's like the rich guys. Let's say you're a black billionaire and a white billionaire. The guy is not going to look at you and he's like, this guy is black, this and this. No, he's like, this guy has money. Let's make money. We're making money. Those guys are hating each other because they're whatever color they are. Let's let them stay broke that way and keep that system while we get more money and we don't care about our colors. So I think that's how it works. But, you know, I don't really care that much about racism, so
the sheer scale of immigration has caused problems for the UK's infrastructure, which was largely built in the 70s. But you know what? None of that really bothers me. What really bothers me is Frankie Boyle's attempt to make British people feel ashamed of Britain's involvement in the slave trade. That really gets my goat, because Britain's involvement in the slave trade is one of the most proud accomplishments of British history. And I know what you're thinking, oh my goodness, slavery is bad. And that's correct. Which is why the British ended it. For everyone. If we just take a cursory look at the subject,
did they really
see how it is not nearly as cut and dried as Frankie makes it out to be.
Started it too.
Even the very word slave comes from Slav, because of the sheer number of Slavs taken as slaves by conquering peoples. But Frankie is trying to drum up white guilt. So let's talk about African slavery. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to start exploring the West African coast, and they did indeed capture African natives to be brought back to Portugal as items of curiosity. Europeans who travelled to Western Africa discovered that Western Africa had civilizations of its own. For example,
bro, imagine how funny it is. You've never seen a black person or a white person ever. I think it's a ghost. If I saw a white person, like all I know is black, brown. I've never seen like a light person. I'd be like, oh, it's a ghost. I saw this little animation. It's anime. So this guy, he was black and he found himself in Japan, and those guys, they're trying to wash him. They're like, he's dirty, but that's his skin color. They're like so surprised. They're trying to wash him. They're like, maybe he fell in a pool of mud and it's stuck. But that's how it looks like. So I get that. If I was in their position, I'd definitely capture a lot of white people and say,
Dutch
okay, these
visitor
guys
to
look
Benin City
interesting.
wrote in around 1600, "As you enter it, the town appears very great. You go into a great broad street, not paved, which seems to be 7 or 8 times broader than the Warmost Street in Amsterdam. The houses in this town stand in good order, one close and even with the other, as the houses in Holland stand."
What's this about?
More than a century earlier, Benin exchanged ambassadors with Portugal. The Portuguese did take a few Africans back to Europe, but they didn't need to set up operations because they discovered that there were already thriving slave trades in Africa. And so they bought slaves from African rulers and traders. The vast majority of slaves taken out of Africa was sold by African rulers, traders, and military aristocracy who grew wealthy from the business. Most slaves were acquired through wars or by kidnapping. And before you start thinking that this is excessively barbaric, this was the standard for almost every civilized society all across the world. For example, in ancient Greece, Strabo tells us that the island of Delos trafficked in 10,000 slaves a day.
Bro, this isn't the only place. Egypt had slaves, like biblically talking. They enslaved Hebrews, and it was like huge, really, really big. It's crazy. And so yeah, definitely slavery's been there forever. It's just crazy. And there's no really, I think it's just pretty bad. Because some people are like, oh, these guys were just servants, but then it's so deep. I'll tell you more about this one at the,
even
in the
before
videos,
the Roman Empire, even when we're coming to the end of the Roman Republic in the 1st century BC, it's estimated that a third of Italy was made up of slaves. Slaves made up of people whom the Romans had conquered and taken back to Italy to do hard labour. And so to anyone even slightly educated on the subject, it is absolutely unsurprising to find that, for example, in 1510, the capital of the Empire of Songhai was teeming with slaves. Slave trading in West Africa.
Bro, what's his name?
But it was different to
Genghis
what
Khan.
you expect. It wasn't for commercial purposes.
Definitely.
It was to show status and to give the wealthy African elite a comfortable life. And with the appearance of Europeans desperate to buy slaves for use in the Americas, character of African slave ownership changed. Indeed it did. The character of slavery on the west coast of Africa changed to look a lot more like the character of slavery on the east coast of Africa, because we're going to talk about the Arab slave trade, specifically the circumstance of Swahili-speaking peoples. Unsurprisingly, the Arabs, being far closer to sub-Saharan Africa than the Europeans, had been taking advantage of it for far longer. They were a people with as much commercial nous as anyone else.
Hey, stop right there. What the heck? I speak Swahili. These guys are talking about me. The ruling class of coastal Swahili society, sultans, blah, blah, blah. Muslim slaves used non-Muslim slaves as domestic servants to work on farms and estates. This is literally what happened in Egypt too. That's not really surprising. So none of this surprises me. It's just
the ruling class of coastal Swahili
seen.
society, sultans, government officials, and wealthy merchants used non-Muslim slaves as domestic servants and to work on farms and estates. And they even had plantations, such as the Omani Sultan Said, who became immensely rich when he started up clove plantations in the 1820s with slave labour. Arab Muslims settled along the coast and intermixed with the locals, forming a people and culture known as Swahili, which started in around the 10th century AD. So unsurprisingly, the East Africa slave trade was well established long before Europeans arrived on the scene and was driven by demands for labour by the sultanates of the Middle East. You might be thinking,
this context
that's
to have to
interesting.
do
If
with
the
me?
Arabs had been in Africa for about 1,000 years, taking sub-Saharan African slaves, why isn't there a very large population of black people in Arabia? And the answer to that is that the Arabs used to castrate them. cock and balls entirely, a practice that
That sounded funny. Man, I'd be so mad if someone had to cut my balls. Let's see. The Arab slave trade typically dealt in the scale of castrated male slaves. Black boys between age 8 and 12 had their scrotums and penises completely. Ooh, yo, that's so harsh, bro. Oh, they cut your. Oh no, I don't want mine cut off. Oh, that hurts. I feel bad for them. Okay, castration. That's one big no. No boy should be denied of a penis. You know, that's so funny. Why was that funny? But this is sad. This is bad. Oh, the Arabs, man, that was evil. You're basically a girl once they do that. Once they cut your penis and no balls. Wow, these guys are pretty smart. Interesting. About 6 of every 10 boys bled to death. Whoa, that's a huge percentage. 6 of every 10, according to sources. But the high price brought in I don't know. I can't even pronounce that. On the market made the practice profitable. That was bad.
supposed
Cock
to have
and
ended
balls.
in
Don't cut mine,
1962
man. That's
when
bad.
slavery was finally outlawed in places like Saudi Arabia. This, of course,
At least
does
balls
not mean
only,
that the
bro.
trade has actually
Don't
stopped.
cut the
It
wee
is
wee.
still going on today. It's impossible to know exactly how many slaves the Arabs took from sub-Saharan Africa on the east coast, but one historian produced
Arabs,
a total
bro,
of
that was
17
bad.
million
That was
slaves.
bad.
I
Cock
doubt
and
it was
balls,
that high,
no.
but again, we can't know.
I'm
And
against
it
that
was for
so
over 1,000
much.
years that this was happening.
Castration.
The point is that slavery was ubiquitous. No matter where on earth you travelled, you found slaves. In Europe, in China, in the
Slaves.
Middle East, in the New World, in India, in Scandinavia,
Chinese
in
slaves.
Africa.
I never heard about
Slavery
that a lot.
was as common an institution as animal husbandry. The only thing that separated the Christian nations of Western
Animal
Europe
what?
from anyone else on Earth was the efficiency with which they could transport taken slaves. And it should come as no surprise that this was made possible by advances in technology that the rest of the world simply didn't
Boats.
have. The most common number I could find regarding the total number of slaves taken from Africa by Europeans
Portugal
was
took the
11
most.
million, and that is
Sheesh.
in about a 400-year time span. Portugal took the most slaves, with over 4.5 million transported
Damn.
to the New World.
But I never hear
Then
about
Britain
it a lot.
with over 2.5 million, then Spain and France totaling just under 3 million. And just so no one is under any illusions,
That's crazy.
the transatlantic slave trade must have been close to hell on earth. Slaves were taken from Africa and packed
Definitely.
into conditions so
Oh, look at this, bro. This is the bottom of the boat. That's the front of the boat. Oh man, I guess sometimes I guess dying is justified. I would not kill myself. I don't like stuff like that. I don't like suicide. But when you're in this position, you know they're gonna these guys don't know they're gonna castrate them yet, but if I have the knowledge that they're gonna cut off my balls, I like, come on, man. I jump off. Really, like, oh, that's if you get the chance to jump off. Oh, man, that's pretty harsh. They couldn't even do separate boats. But that doesn't matter. You're gonna be a slave and you're gonna go get beaten all the time. So why do they have to treat you right? Man, blame your people for selling you. I wouldn't sell my kind.
disgraceful and
That's
disgusting,
bad.
it is unsurprising that there was such a high mortality rate for the crossing. As offensive as this is to look at,
Oh,
we have to remember that this is a consequence of dehumanization. The slaves were not people, they were
once they
chattel.
make you look
It
like
will
a
obviously
hand,
come
like
as
a
absolutely no surprise that the driving motivation behind slavery was economic. Portuguese merchants traded with Africans from trading posts they set up along the coast. They exchanged items like brass and copper bracelets for such products as pepper, cloth, beads, and slaves. all part of an existing internal African trade.
Imagine
But the
being traded
transatlantic
for
slave
a
trade
cloth.
really took off
I'll be
when
so
Christopher
mad
Columbus
for
discovered the New
beads.
World. The Portuguese initially had a monopoly on the slave trade, but this was broken in the 16th century when England, followed by France and other European nations, entered the trade. Unsurprisingly, this was a massively profitable trade for everyone involved except the slaves. Africa's rulers, traders, and military aristocracy protected their interest in the slave trade. They discouraged Europeans from leaving the coastal areas to venture to the interior of the continent. European trading companies realized the benefit of dealing with African suppliers and not unnecessarily antagonizing them. The companies could not have mustered the resources it would have taken to directly capture the tens of millions of people shipped out of Africa. It was far more sensible and safer to give Africans guns to fight in the many wars that yielded captives for trade. The slave trading network stretched
Guns.
deep into Africa's interior.
Man, I know those slaves were mad. You get traded for a gun. A gun. You get traded for that. Oh man, I'd cry too, bro. I'm getting traded for a gun to shoot people, like just that, and I'm getting like that cost my life. A gun nowadays, you could find one for what? Let's see, 200. Okay, you can find one for like 135. You can find a gun for 130, 200. So around, let's see, average 250. Your life as a slave. That's a lot of money. That's actually, let's go lower. If they're trading slaves for beads and cloth, your life is worth less than your life is worth less than $10. Being a slave was bad. You're not even a human anymore. Because I love animals. I won't say anything bad about animals, but like once someone thinks of you as an animal, because if an animal gets aggressive, you have to beat it so it doesn't bite you, and so it could obey its master. So if you look at someone as like that, as done, you can do anything, even kill them and not feel that bad because it's an animal at the end of the day and you can replace it.
Trading firms were aware of their dependency on African suppliers, and these African suppliers were making insane amounts of money. For example, the King of Benin was making
£250 a year.
£250,000 a year.
Let me see, how much is that in American money? Let me search this up. That's 300,000. That's 300,000 US dollars. And he made that per year? That's pretty good. I'm not gonna lie, that's pretty good. 300,000. A doctor has to go to school for like 10 years, have all this debt, and he still won't get that per year. Wow. Slavery, interesting business. And now that you look at it, I'm sure if these guys, I don't even think they'd care if they know. If you brought back this guy, King Tegbesu, if you brought him back nowadays and show him like, yo, look, this is what selling slaves does, he'd be like, yo, I made money, I don't care. That'd be his opinion. And keep in mind, this much money is at least double what I just said. So it's probably 600,000 in today's money, or close to $1 million. So this guy was making good money. Do I like slavery? No. But if I'm making this much money, I'd have to. I don't know. I don't want to sell my own people, but this money is evil, bro.
Yeah,
money
selling
is evil.
people into
That's all I'll
slavery in
say.
1750. And his successor said in the 1840s that he would do anything the British wanted him to do, apart from giving up the slave trade. Quote, "The slave trade is the ruling principle of my people. It is the source and the glory of their wealth. The mother lulls the child to sleep with notes of triumph over an enemy reduced to slavery. With an industry so..."
And bro, this stuff is so... I have so much to say, and I'll say it. We all have enemies, and if you hate your enemy that much, you're gonna sell them to slavery. It won't feel bad, it'll feel good. You get revenge. They go get beaten up in another country. They're working for somebody else. They're gonna get treated like a dog. They're dogs once you do that to them, once you sell them. And your enemy won't ever get revenge on you. Doesn't that sound like a sweet victory for you? Yeah, these guys were evil. Like, you're actually evil. I wouldn't wish slavery on my worst enemy. Actually, I don't think I would. Would I? I don't know. Uh, but I'll tell you more about this though once the video
Profitable
keeps going.
to
But
so
this
many
is pretty
people
bad.
involved, and so widespread as to be common to almost every nation on earth. Why would the British want King Gezo to give up the slave trade? Well, we need to turn back the clock to 1066 and the Battle of Hastings, when a French-speaking Duke of Viking descent called William the Bastard defeated King Harold Godwinson.
Oh, this guy, I heard about it.
William the Bastard was refashioned as William the Conqueror and took the crown of England. And one of the first things he did as King of England was to have the entire country inventoried. This record was known as the Domesday Book, and we still have it. Thanks to this hard work, we know that around 1086, 10% of the recorded population of England were slaves. 20 years earlier, when he had first conquered England, William had enacted a series of laws, one of which prohibited the slave trade out of England. I prohibit the sale of a man by another outside of the country on pain of a fine paid in full to me. We don't know what William's...
Oh, what type of ink? Why do you even write, I prohibit the sale of any man by another outside the country on pain? This English back then was so bad. This doesn't sound right. But cool. What the heck? Look at this law number 10. I also forbid that anyone shall be slain or hanged for any fault, but let his eyes be put out and let him be castrated. What? And this command shall not be violated under pain of a fine in full to me. Why would they? Is this regarding that number 9 rule? Yeah, this bastard guy was crazy. Anything but castration. Wow, castration is actually so bad. Like, I love my balls. That's all I'll say. That's just, this affected
this
me.
law was. But
I feel so
given
bad for
that
those boys.
the punishment for breaking it was
Your
a
balls
fine,
are being cut
I
off.
doubt it was for humanitarian reasons. Whatever his reasons, within a generation of 1086, slavery had almost died out in England. Presumably because William the Conqueror had outlawed
1086.
the trade of slaves. There appears to also have been a trend for
What?
lords to
That's
endow
so
their
far
slaves
back.
to perform their ploughing functions as free ploughmen. While not a wonderful state of affairs, serfdom is better than chattel slavery. And this state of affairs was solidified by the Church at the Synod of Westminster in 1102, where the Church
Why do they give
denounced
the church so
simony,
much power?
clerical marriages, and slavery. This made England a very unique case. There probably wasn't another country in the world at this time that had outlawed slavery. There were practically no motivations
Ceremonial
to do so.
marriages? What is that?
Incredibly lucrative, endemic to the point of normalcy, so it wasn't even viewed as immoral, and the chances are William the Conqueror himself made the slave trade in England illegal just so he could make a quick buck. Fast forward 700 years, and the international
that too.
slave
Everybody
trade
loves
is
money.
in full swing, and yet we still do not have slaves in England. And this is where we meet a man named Granville Sharp, a very well-educated, rationalist
he had a
thinker of
long
the
nose.
Enlightenment, who became an
And a
active
long
campaigner
chin.
for the abolition of the slave trade. Granville had had previous legal success defending Jonathan Strong from his erstwhile slave master after being brought to England from the colonies.
But then
We're
how
going
does
to
this
look at
explain
the
racism?
subsequent Somerset case. James Somerset was a slave from Virginia in America who had come to England with his master Charles Stuart in 1769.
Oh, I've heard this
Ran
guy.
away
I've
in
heard about
October
him.
1771. After evading slave hunters employed by Stuart for 56 days, Somerset had been caught, put onto the slave ship Anne and Mary to be taken to Jamaica and sold. 3 Londoners had applied to Lord Mansfield for a writ of habeas
Jamaica.
corpus, which had been granted, with Somerset having to appear at a hearing.
Now, see, I'm not a history, like, a nerd, but I know this stuff. I can't even pronounce that. Habeas corpus. Like, you can't, once you're in a state that doesn't allow slavery, you're free. That's what this Charles Stewart guy thought. So he ran away, and then he had them do this court case. Did they do a court case? It was he went to court with the master. No, no, did the master die? And then his wife wanted to keep him. I forgot how it goes, but it goes something like that. But I'm rooting for Charles, honestly.
On the
I don't want
25th
my
of
balls
January
cut off.
1772, members of the public responded to the plight by sending money to pay for his lawyers, who in any event gave their services pro bono publico, while Stuart's costs were met by the West Indian planters and merchants.
What the heck is
Given
that?
his prior legal experience with the Jonathan Strong case, Sharp briefed Somerset's lawyers. The judgment was delivered on the 22nd of June 1772, and it was a clear victory for Somerset, Sharp, and the lawyers who had acted for Somerset. Mansfield acknowledged that English law did not allow slavery, and only a new Act of Parliament could bring it into legality. The verdict established one thing very clearly: a slave becomes free the moment he sets foot on English soil. And this was, according to Lord
Oh,
Mansfield,
that sounds about
that
right.
the air of England is too pure for any slave to breathe. No matter what reason William the Conqueror outlawed slavery for, by
Oh,
the time this
yo, that is. Hey, that's a bit. That's too. That's crazy. The air of England is too pure. Hey, what about the heat waves? I'm just playing, but you get the point. You get what he means. I don't understand why they paid for Somerset's lawyers, because I thought those guys would be hating on the sidelines. But this is it restores some faith in humanity somehow. But then it's so weird how yeah, this Charles Stewart guy was definitely on crack. He probably loved that stuff because it's so logical. A slave goes to free territory. How are they going to be a slave there? Some of these court cases were pretty dumb, honestly. Like I understand this stuff. I'm not even a lawyer, but I could potentially solve this case.
judgment was drawn by
I
Lord
should be a
Mansfield,
lawyer.
it had become a point of principle. This precedent wasn't set for Mansfield's personal interests. This precedent was set to determine right from wrong. Granville Sharp went on to co-found the Society for Effecting
Come on,
the
man. Even a
Abolition of the
10-year-old
Slave Trade
knows right from
with
wrong.
fellow like-minded Enlightenment thinkers. And after 20 long years of campaigning in Parliament, which I won't detail here, they were successful in their goal of abolishing the international slave trade in 1807. Now, if you know anything about 1807, you'll know that this was during the War of the Fourth Coalition, where Napoleon Bonaparte was savaging great powers all across the European continent. The Napoleonic Wars
Napoleon
led
was
to
a sad
new
dude,
territorial
bro. He got
acquisitions
cheated
in
on
Britain
so much.
and helped stuff Parliament with more abolitionists than they had before, which is why the bill providing for the abolition of the slave trade to conquered territories triumphantly passed in both houses. And the following year this was superseded by a stronger measure that outlawed the British Atlantic slave trade altogether. But, given the raging war in Europe, it was rather difficult to enforce due to a paucity of available resources. After 1807, the Society for the Abolition of the Slave Trade, having achieved its goals, became the African Institution, whose principal aim was to ensure the new legislation was enforced and that other countries followed Britain's example. Persuading other countries to join Britain outlawing the slave trade proved more difficult. Despite the efforts of the African Institution and those of British ministers, the Congresses of Paris.
Oh wait, they didn't just. Oh, they're still following William the Bastard's influence. That guy was crazy. I wonder how much money he made from that. Like you just stop. Because I know nowadays in today's society, if you say, let's see, because they use children for labor. All these Apple companies to make your beautiful iPhones. All this chocolate from Hershey. I don't know if you guys know that place, but all these computers, all these batteries we use, all this tech around me was made by kids probably. So all those kids, imagine if the government was like, okay, Apple, stop using kids. Go find actual employees to make all this stuff. Or all these luxury brands, all these Nike shoes. They're like, okay, stop making kids work. You know how much they'd dislike that? So imagine someone telling you, give up slavery. You're making millions. You're feeding your kids off another man being enslaved. Why would you hate this? So I suppose some of these guys did have a lot of assassination attempts. I wonder how William the Bastard died. Someone probably killed him because someone who loved slavery was like, dude, you took my slaves. Like, I want slaves. Like, what are you on? Like, no one's trying. Why did he end it? I'm actually surprised. What was going through his head? I need a clear video on that.
1814 both failed to reach a specific agreement. Given that this was at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, it's hardly surprising that there was French opposition. Where diplomacy had failed, the Royal Navy had to succeed. It's one thing declaring a writ that people may no longer profit from the trading of human beings, it's another thing to enforce that. Enter the West African Squadron. The West Africa Squadron was a detachment of the Royal Navy that was given the task of blockading Africa, the continent, to make sure that slave traders were not taking slaves to the Americas. Needless to say, in 1807, there was only a token force performing this operation, comprising of 2 ships. This number was increased to 5 ships until the War of 1812 with the United States. But after 18...
Yo, that is pretty Yo, you know what's kind of messed up? I thought just came through my mind. I'm just imagining myself right now. I'm in America. I'm a black dude, and you know I'm free. Like I'm right like this. I just teleport, and I'm walking along the white guys. Would they say, "This guy's a slave"? Like, well, who's your master? Would they ask? They'd ask me that definitely. So I'm wondering. It wasn't about color when those guys were selling each other to make money. It wasn't about color. But then that just gives you, it's like a little cheat code. You see a black guy, he's a slave. So what would happen in that case? What if you're just like, you're a rich guy, a black rich guy who came to America by himself? What happens then? Like having black skin, brown skin, that was bad. Wrong color, bro. No. That is bad news for me. That is bad news. Okay, let's say I don't want to go back in time. But I know my ancestors were not slaves for sure. Because I am African. I'm not African American. I'm just African. Because that because I was really, it's weird. I was thinking about this. I'm like, yeah, I know African people were sold into slavery, but if my ancestors were in Africa and I just came from Africa myself, that means I never left Africa. So, boom, I don't come from a family of slaves. So there we go. I'm just glad I just got colonized. That's all. That is pretty bad. All that is bad. I don't like that. Yeah, I'll tell you more about that when the video goes on, though.
And supreme at sea, the Royal Navy turned its attention back to the challenge. The institution of slavery was formally abolished.
Slavery Abolition Act.
1833.
I'd put this act out too. I don't like slavery.
Around 25 vessels and 2,000 officers and men were on the station, supported by nearly 1,000 crewmen. Experienced fishermen recruited as sailors from what is now the coast of modern Liberia. It's worth noting that this was not a pleasant job, and the mortality rate was 5 times higher compared with fleets in the Mediterranean or in home waters. To help incentivize the crew, money was actually given to each crew per slave that they freed. But there was a real zeitgeist in Britain for the abolition of slavery.
What's the catch?
For example, the pursuit and capture of slave ships became celebrated naval engagements, widely reported back in peacetime Britain. They became a source of national pride. So it's no wonder that many of the crews really did have an evangelical zeal about the anti-slavery patrolling. However, I don't want to give the impression that this was all for humanitarian reasons. There's no doubt that Britain, in her foreign policy, used her anti-slavery laws as a stick with which to beat her opponents, primarily the Spaniards and the Portuguese, who refused to conform to these demands. Britain demanded Spain, Portugal, and the very new nation of Brazil to declare slave trading to be piracy. And while these nations paid lip service to these principles, they failed to enforce them, which led to a British blockade of Brazil by 1850, which of course forced the nascent Brazilian Empire to capitulate. And it didn't end there. In the 1860s, David Livingstone reports of Arab atrocities against enslaved Africans stirred up the interest of the British public, reviving the flagging abolitionist movement. Throughout the 1870s, the Navy attempted to suppress this abominable eastern trade at Zanzibar in particular. Needless to say, the British Navy continued their mission against the slavers across the Indian Ocean. The abolition of slavery became the British project. It captured the hearts and minds of the entire country.
Hold on, let me, I don't know. I actually still don't know why they just stopped it. Because I know that bastard dude, you don't just come out of nowhere and say, okay, stop slavery. Did his parents tell him something like, because he's a man of culture, I'll say that for sure. How do you just ended slavery? You just ended that. Because Britain didn't do that. Britain would not want to do that. It's all thanks to that bastard guy. He did that. Britain didn't do that. They most likely wouldn't have wanted to do that. But the bastard dude, because if the William guy, William the bastard is the guy I'm talking about. The other guy he killed to take the throne, that guy would still want slavery for sure. So this bastard guy, he had something on him. He was different. I wonder where he was a Viking, I heard. So he must have known about this slavery. So I don't know what was going through his head. I'm actually still surprised, but good.
From the highest
that he
lord
stopped
to
it.
the lowest peasant. This is certainly how the British saw it. For example,
He had so much
this spirit
influence
of
too.
chivalry, we see it in acts of heroism by land and sea in fights against the slave trade. Alfred Tennyson, the unweary, unostentatious, and inglorious crusade of England
So
against
much
slavery
big words.
may
No one
probably
ever
be
understands
regarded
them.
as among the 3 or 4 perfectly virtuous pages comprised in the History of Nations. William Lecky. All of this was done against the vested financial interests of hundreds of thousands of people. Entire nations were against the idea of abolishing slavery and the slave trade. The very notion was alien to the human existence.
The very people selling their own people wanted that too.
In the 19th century,
Until William the Conqueror made it
bearing down on
happen.
you, flying this flag, and you were a slave trader, you knew that this flag stood for liberty. This was the flag of a nation that defied human convention for a point of principle and spent its blood.
Sounds all too good. I'm not even against Britain, don't get me wrong. I'm gonna see a comment. They're like, oh, this guy is not grateful. Slavery, they ended slavery. They're the good guys, all this. Yeah, I like that. I like that they ended slavery. I'm not against any of that at all. I like the William guy for ending that. He's a just person, I'll say that. But then, at that time, it was like slavery was so normal, no one could think it's bad. It's like drinking water. Everybody knows drinking water is good. That's good for your body. Slavery makes you money. Go do slavery. Don't be a slave, be the master. You make money. That's how it went. So, what the heck was this William guy? Just confusing me. I don't know. It's not supposed to be that deep, but it's confusing me. But I'll say some more about this.
Sweat,
at the
tears,
end of the
and
video.
treasure to enforce it on the world. This is the flag of the nation
This
that
guy's
accepted
proud, I can
the
hear it.
absolute moral truth that slavery is wrong. No matter what riches can be amassed, no
It
matter
is
what
wrong.
power can be gained, no matter the cost, slavery had to be abolished. That was the British Crusade. When Britain held the reins of world power, that is what she did with it. So Frankie, to be honest with you, when you say, we have streets named after slave owners, we have profited from a vile crime and feel no shame, it is British people that don't learn languages or British history. Britain is the true scrounger, the true criminal. I have to
Hey,
concur.
but I don't think anybody cares at this point.
British people apparently do not learn British history.
Honestly, I don't really know that much American history too. I'm not that much of a history guy. I just, for big important topics, I look into them, like this one right here. But when it comes to people talking about, oh, so there's a statue of this racist guy. He used to be bad. Let's go destroy it. Let's go vandalize it. I never understand that. That guy's dead. That guy is in a casket 6 feet deep. He has bones now. He doesn't care about you. Just let him rest. As I know it's like that's too much for, that's like, no one wants to do that. No one wants to give them that rest. But then it just makes me think, what if, I don't know, it's like it's like a trend. You guys know now there's so many trends. There's I don't know, there's so much, I can't even name one. But slavery, was it a trend? You could argue that it was a trend. Everybody's, I mean, not really. You're making money from it. I mean, I guess it was a trend. I guess even some guys that were good people, they're like, I just want slaves because look, that guy, look how much money that guy's making. Let me just do what he's doing and maybe I'll make money. It's a trend. So, I don't know. Because imagine if it was the other way around and it's like a lot of white people are being sold from these European countries, being taken to Africa, and then Europe is making money. Let's say it was like that. So the black people would be the bad guys in that case. So anybody who got that, because you know, all this like blame, it usually goes to like America and like all these, like, you never hear like any Spanish countries getting the blame for this. I swear no one ever talks about that because I don't know, no one talks about it. But then Brazil, all those countries, Portugal, Spain, those dudes also had it, a bunch of it, and didn't want to stop it. But then you hear, because I'm not defending any of this, of course. I could really care less about defending them because I don't earn a single thing. I'm just speaking my mind right now. So that's how it goes. That's really my thoughts about
Britain's
this.
involvement in the slave trade is one of the most proud moments any nation could have had in their history. I want to make one thing crystal clear, Frankie.
Oh,
You
this
live
guy's
in
evil.
a world without
Frankie.
slavery because of Britain.
I would have stopped it too. I would have stopped it too if I lived that long. I'm a pretty reasonable man, and you could tell. I know what I'm talking about for the most part. But you guys tell me what you thought about this video. I'm still shocked by that part about your penis being cut off and your balls. I'm traumatized, man. You can tell. I don't want to lose that. I love what I have. Oh, those poor boys. Oh, those poor boys. They make me so sad. But yeah, if you made it this far, thank you and have a nice day.